It has been 3 days since Jack met with his two half-siblings. During these past 2 days, he had already completed the payment for the logo design. Then, he handed it to the clothes and car shop. This way, all of his orders would begin to be processed. At the same time, he didn't stop purchasing grocery stores. And since there were several of them and were at different parts of the city, Jack had no choice but to get a manager. Well, he got more than one manager, to be precise. It was just that there was a single one that had authority over the other 7. Jack had decided that the groceries would be divided into zones depending on their location in the city. He had decided on the 8 compass directions: north, east, west, south, northeast, northwest, southeast, and finally southwest. Each direction matched the city in that the northern zone was found in the northern part of the city. But of course, there was another zone that he hadn't selected a manager yet. He had promised Agnes, George, and Charles that he may make them the leaders of the grocery stores in 2 or 3 streets. He was going to fulfill that. But that would have to wait to the time that they were going to move to the new shop that he bought in Yellow Street. Not only was it spacious, it had a good parking space too. They had yet to move in, and it would need 2 more days before the renovation would be completed. He was doing the same with the other stores that he'd bought around the city. Of course, the renovation that he was doing on the other stores that had business running was just painting and adding the logo that had been designed by the best designer of canvas graphics arts designers. They had completed and sent him the logo via his email this morning. Immediately after that, he had sent this to the managers of each region to get someone, a professional in painting of course, to insert the logo during the time that the business was low. All the groceries under him were now painted, being painted or would be painted lime green. This was going to be the color of his grocery department. During these past days, the income coming from the grocery department had been increasing, and so was the amount that he was spending. But all the same, he was making sure to clear all the debts. Currently, the only debt on him was the one for the Prince and Princess Palace. He still had a debt of over 10 million that would be repaid soon as the projects that had been consuming money were at their final periods. As for the supply contract that he'd signed, the condition that was decided on was one of COD. With every delivery, Jack would have to make the payments within a day. This would go on until the $30 million order was completed. As for the staff uniforms, some had already been completed. A lime green top with a matching blazer, black bottoms. The logo of Jackson Enterprise was also printed on the left chest. And since this was the grocery department, there was a G.D added below the logo. Now, the only thing that he needed to do was ask a manager to go and collect them. The clothes were ready before, only needing the logo. Now that Jack had sent them the logo in the morning, they had printed them on a few of them. On the first night, he received $301,458. On the second night, he received $789,532. And on this night, Jack wasn't sure how much he was going to receive as he had made further purchases of the stores. Now, if these two were multiplied by 100 times, it would bring a total of $109,089,000. With this amount of money, Jack had no problem in paying for the stores that he purchased the previous day and today. Then, there was the issue about the first income reward. Jack had been told by the system that he could save them and receive all of them at the same time in the form of a higher quality reward. As a result, since Jack didn't want so many sports cars or motorcycles, he agreed to this. Currently, there were a total of 47 stores that Jack owned. He was going to make the final purchase the following day, and he would be closing the chapter about purchasing grocery stores in Inchoate City. The total expenses till this moment was approximately $72 million. This included the payment for the uniform, buying 8 more Freightliners, paying for renovation of the stores, buying an apartment for Agnes, Charles, and George, buying a few pairs of clothes, and paying for the stock purchase. He had also bought a total of 8 Freightliners. All of them were still undergoing repainting at this time before they get delivered so that the stores in the 8 zones can start using them. As for the one that he'd bought before, that would be used by the Central Zone, located at the center of the city. Of course, there were no stores that he'd purchased there just yet. He would do so after buying an office building for Jackson Enterprise. Currently, there was no store under his name that lacked stock. The only things that would need refreshing would be those that were needed fresh. But for those that had a long shelf life, there were enough for a month or 2. Flyer's bank account balance is $29,840,607. Jack was currently standing on the bridge while looking at the setting sun. The horizon was already painted orange as the sun had already sunk, but its hue was still being displayed. As the orange color of the horizon reflected on his blue eyes, a complicated feeling was rising with his heart and flooding to his eyes. For some reason, every night, he would either think of her before sleeping or he would dream about her. This was the first time that a stranger had occupied his mind in such a manner. He didn't know what to do about the strange feelings. He was getting an urge to go out and meet her, to at least see her face again, so that his heart that had began beating out of rhythm could calm down. He let out a slightly frustrated sigh. He was wondering what was going on with him. He knew well that the city was big, and there was no way that he could find her unless he had connections. But still, the connections that he'd built too far were just smaller ones and couldn't do much. He took a look at his newly bought watch and saw that it was already 10 minutes past 5 in the evening. This was the last day of the time that the system had given him to complete the task. Since today was July 17th, the temperatures were already at 19 degrees Celsius. It was summer after all. He had previously asked George where there could be some rich young masters of Inchoate City that liked racing. George had told him that most nighttime car racing occurred at a mountainous called Mount Bright. This mountain was mainly made of bare rocks and had little vegetation on it. But still, the roads that were made below the mountain or on some of the lower parts of the mountain were good. After looking at it in Google, Jack had seen that it was true. Furthermore, it seemed that the person who had planned the construction of the roads there had the intention of creating a place for racing. After all, the roads in the area around the mountain were rarely used, and what's more, they were in such a way that a person might think that they were racetracks due to the bends. Furthermore, they were in such a way that one could go several laps as long as she doesn't take the road that led back to the city. The special feature of this mountain was that it had a low altitude and didn't have snow. So, it didn't affect the temperatures around the city that much during winter, but the effects could be seen during summer. The temperatures at night were high on the western part of the city, closer to the mountain. Maybe that's why they called it Mount Bright? Jack wasn't sure about it. Jack went back to the prince's palace mansion. After taking his early supper, he got prepared for the race. He wore a white t-shirt, a pair of black jeans, and white sneakers. This outfit immediately outlined his well-sculpted body. With a matching handsome face, he really looked dashing. He got out of the mansion and headed for the parking lot. There, he found George waiting for him. Since it was going to be Jack's first time there, he needed a person to introduce him. George had been going there before. That was when he was still racing, before he began delivery work. "Good evening, boss." As soon as George, who was adorned in a pair of casual blue jeans, a black t-shirt, and a pair of polo shoes, saw Jack, he immediately greeted him enthusiastically. Since he was hired by Jack, the quality of his life had drastically improved, and it wasn't a week yet. Jack had gotten them an apartment where they stayed. Of course, this was the privilege that only the three of them enjoyed. Even in terms of transportation, they were using the Bentley Bentayga in case they were going to, and from the store and the apartment. "Let's get going. You said that racing begins at 7. Jack asked as he entered the Bentley Continental GT. George got into the Bentley with a slight hint of hesitation on his face, remembering Jack's crazy driving, and replied, "Yes, boss. The racing will begin at 7 and registration will end at 6:45 p.m. Okay, put on that seatbelt. We're going. Currently, it's 45 minutes past 5. To get there, we'll need at least 30 minutes. So, sit tight." As Jack said this, he immediately began driving out of the palace before speeding towards Mount Bright. George, who was already shaking within, couldn't help but let out a slight smile while thinking to himself, "You guys think that you're professional drivers? Here comes a real pro in driving, hee. Jack drove the Bentley on the road. He had made sure to choose the roads that were free of traffic. In this way, although he was driving at an incredible speed, George began overcoming his fear and feeling the thrill going crazy while driving. Although he wasn't the one that was driving the car, at least he could enjoy the thrill of being in the passenger seat while seeing how things blurred as they passed them. Even as George enjoyed how Jack drove the car, and how fast as a Bentley Continental GT was, he didn't forget to think about the cause of his drop out of racing. Who clenched his fists as he thought to himself, "Although I'm not the one going to compete with you, there's someone who's even crazier than I when it comes to driving. Let me see how you're going to deal with this now." Even he thought of this, who shifted his attention to Jack, who was driving the car like it was something simple. One had to know that a Bentley Continental GT was a sports car. It can't be driven like all the other normal cars. In other terms, one had to be very experienced in driving so that he or she could drive the car at such a high speed on the highways. Jack don't drink too much of his driving skills as he was now going to complete the task that he was assigned to by the system so that he could get the professional driving skill fully. True to Jack's estimation, they arrived at Mount Bright after 30 minutes of driving. In other words, they had arrived at the scene when it was already 6:15 p.m. George showed Jack the way to the parking area of those who were going to participate in the racing competition. After all, not all those that came to Mount Bright were going to participate in the competition. They were those who came just for fun, or those who came for betting. There was another group of people who came to support their favorite drivers. And not to forget the group of people who came here with the aim of making connections with the rich second generation that come here race. Upon seeing the Bentley Continental GT, the people in the crowd began making the wild guesses of who the owner of the car was. According to what they knew, all the rich second generation of Inchoate City had already arrived at the scene. Do you think you can guess who the owner of that car is? Why don't you go ahead and do the guessing? Am I supposed to guess who the owner is when I can clearly see that this car is newly bought and it hasn't been a week since it was purchased? Furthermore, from my location there's no way that I can see who the driver is. I'm sitting right next to you. Then how do you expect me to guess who the person driving the car is when I can't see him either? Ha ha ha, I can already guess that there's a new person in our city. Maybe he's from another city and he has come here to have fun. Hey, don't make wild guesses yet. You may not know who will be coming out of the car after it stops. It may be an old geezer who is here to cause trouble. Perhaps that's your dad and that's why you are so sure about it. Can you guys be serious? Since when did old men start to fancy sports cars? Hiki, you're right. As the fans and the betting maniacs began making their own speculations about who the new owner of the car was, the well-known rich second generation began making their way towards the parking lot. They were obviously curious about this newcomer. After Jack parked the car, he dismounted it alongside George. George was already familiar with this place, and so he began introducing Jack to what was supposed to be done or where he had to go if he needed something. The handsome appearance Jack immediately caught the eyes of the young ladies who had come here with their own aims. Wow, what a handsome guy. Do you think he can accept me to be his girlfriend? Look at yourself in the mirror before asking such a question. Yeah, that's right. Furthermore, do you even know if he has a girlfriend? It doesn't matter. I can be his side chick. Bah, you're not qualified to compete with me. Only I can be his side chick. Get lost. If not for your thick makeup, I'm sure that you wouldn't dare to be so thick-skinned. Mike, me and you, we're done. I'm going to look for that Mr. Handsome to marry me. Faith, aren't we already engaged? You and who? I didn't accept the engagement. Here's your ring. But you accepted my proposal back then. I was muddle-headed back then. Ha ha ha. Mike, you've just been dumped by your girlfriend for a man that she's never seen before. Look at my girlfriend here. She didn't do something like dash dot. Hey Sam, from this moment on, just like she did, I'm dumping you as well. Hey, are you serious? Ha ha. The crowd of young ladies had already began discussing who will be married by Jack. This immediately attracted the envious gazes of their admirers and dark faces of their boyfriends. Jack, who was just meeting the second generation of Inchoate City, didn't know that he had just caused the hearts of many boys to be broken or that he had just attracted the hatred of most of the boys. Look who it is. Isn't this George? I didn't know that you'd be rich after leaving. A sarcastic voice echoed from the small crowd of the rich second-generation youths. Jack looked at the group of young ladies and young men in front of him. They were draped in the recent fashion-branded clothing and accessories. Since it was summer, there were some that had left parts of their skins exposed, mostly girls. Most of these youths were at the age of 17 to 25, and 25 was the highest that the group would accept. But even so, the younger ones mostly interacted amongst themselves. Young Master Ismail, long time no see. George replied. Although he tried to keep calm, Jack could see that George was angry. He wondered what was going on, but he could still link all of this to George's retirement from racing. Humph, I thought that you won't be participating in racing again. As he spoke, he got to the front from behind the small crowd. He had short hair that was dyed yellow. He was wearing a branded trouser with a branded t-shirt. His handsomeness rating would be at 87. With his bulky body, it was obvious that he was building it by visiting a gym. He was Ismail Cruz, a member of the Cruz family in Inchoate City. The Cruz family was one of the 5 biggest families found in Inchoate City. In Inchoate City, there were 6 families that led in business and assets in the city. The first 5 were Cruz, Ravon, Faro, Jeter, and Sapona. These 5 families had almost the same assets and their competition was intense. Of course, although they were competing, it wasn't to the extent that they were enemies. Although they were competing, their younger generation were always hanging out together. Then, there was a family that, just like Alfonso family in Crystal City, had the most influence in Inchoate City. It was the Raymond family. Most of the time, it was referred to as the overlord of Inchoate City. Currently, all the members of the 5 big families were present. There were others from smaller families as compared to the big 5, but they had assets worth at least 100 million. From how Jack could see, it seemed that George and Miss Ismail had a history. But he wasn't going to get involved as long as nothing overboard happened. I'm not here to race. It's my boss that's here to participate in the race. George replied with a proud voice. Even as he spoke, his nose was pointed to the sky subconsciously. The group of youths immediately stared at Jack and began scrutinizing him. From Jack's casual clothes, they couldn't find anything special about him apart from his handsome face. But they knew that he wasn't someone simple considering the fact that he could afford to purchase the Bentley Continental GT. It was worth close to 10 million. Hello, I am William Farrow. A handsome youth stepped forward and stretched his hand to greet Jack. Hello, I'm Jack. Jack greeted back. His introduction simply mentioned his name and didn't mention what family he came from. William's intention of mentioning his family name was so that Jack could introduce his family, so that they could know where he came from. But since Jack didn't introduce his background, William was forced to ask, "What family are you from?" Jack knew that this would happen, but all the same, he wouldn't use the name of the family that never treated him as part of them. So, he simply shook his head and said, I'm sorry, but I can say anything about that." Upon hearing this, the crowd of youths immediately had their brows raised with interest. If a person could afford the car and couldn't mention his background, could he be a member of one of those hidden families? They were immediately interested with Jack's background. But, since he couldn't say anything about it, they decided not to ask for now. After all, they thought that as long as they got his trust, they would know. Okay then. George said that you're here to race. I guess that you're a professional. William immediately changed the topic. Nah, I'm just a beginner, Jack replied. This answer made George, who was standing beside him proudly while seeing the rich second gen of the city greeting his boss respectfully, nearly rolled his eyes. What beginner? If you're a beginner, then there are no drivers in the world, he thought to himself. Well, William was stumped on what to say next. Hello, Jack. I'm Anderson Jeter. You're here just at the right time. We're going to have our weekly race. The final prize is 5 million. You want to join? Upon seeing that William couldn't speak anymore, a youth with brown eyes, shoulder-length black hair, and handsomeness rating of 90 spoke. When Jack heard about the prize, he was immediately excited. With the system's multiplier, he would get 500 million, just enough for him to stabilize the grocery department. He was just about to reply when an arrogant voice came from the side. There's no need for him to participate. He has never participated in a race before.